Okay. Okie dokie. Let's start recording. Okay? I'm never quite confident without that horrible loud voice going, right now we're recording. Until that scares me out of my skin, I'm never quite convinced we're recording. All right, week 5. We have seen now 2 generations of exiles returning to Jerusalem. And this second generation is led by Ezra, namesake of the book. He finally turned up in chapter 7. He brought with him the king's orders and some considerable offerings for the temple, and everything ended really well at the end of chapter 8. And then chapter 9 begins. After these things had been done, the officials approached me and said, "The people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands with their abominations. From the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for them and for their sons, so that the holy race has mixed itself with the peoples of the lands. And in this faithlessness, the hand of the officials and chief men has been foremost." And Ezra's reaction is a fairly violent one. Not as violent as Nehemiah's gets to be. At least Ezra only pulls out his own hair and beard. But it says he tore his garments, his cloak, pulled hair from his head and his beard, and sat appalled. And from our point of view, it may be difficult to understand why he's so appalled. Because we come from a tradition that says the chief reason for marriage is an overpowering, romantic, erotic reaction to somebody. And so when we approach this, a lot of times people will be like, this is an overreaction. But you have to remember who Ezra was. He was the scribe of the law of God, right? His ambition was to study the law, to do what it says, and to teach others to do what it says. So he would have been familiar with the history that Israel had with intermarriage with the nations around them. Now, some people would be like, oh, this is a totally racist situation. He's like, no, he would have been familiar with Rahab at the time of Joshua. In fact, we'll pull the chief phrase of each of these so that you can kind of get a view of what he would have been aware of, right? So Rahab, quick overview, spies come in to Jericho and they're busted, so they have to hide. And they hide on the rooftop of a woman, innkeeper, some traditions will call her. Some just go flat out and say, yep, she was a prostitute. And they hid on her roof, and she covered for them. She misdirected the people searching, and when she went up to the roof at the end, she's like, all right, you got to run. But before you go, here's what she says. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. And this is a Canaanite woman saying this. So Ezra would have been aware of her. He would also have been aware of Ruth. And honestly, I don't even have to look it up. We all know what her line is, right? I will go where you go. My God will be your God. And sorry, thank you. I'm still wiped out from yesterday. Too much gardening. Your God will be my God. And, to paraphrase it, nothing but death will separate me. She chose to become no longer Moabite, which, if you think about it, in terms of tribal affiliations, it still is a really powerful force. Even today, we have people who, in order to walk with Christ, they have to leave behind their hometown, their family, all of their extended relatives, and sometimes they have to run for their lives because tribal affiliation is really powerful. But these two women, right, it happens sometimes that someone will say, I'm ready to leave behind everything and worship the God of Israel and obey his word. But Ezra would have also been able to weigh the evidence of, say, these two women with the rest of Israel's history. Genesis chapter 34. The story of Dinah and Shechem. Not a nice story in any part of it. But here's the reasoning. When Jacob's sons say, oh, we won't give you our sister unless you become circumcised like we are. Hard sell. That's a hard sell for a whole community, just for one girl. But here's what the logic is behind it. Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of the city, spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. But only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us, to become one people. You hear the language here, the language of absorption. When every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. And here's this thing that, will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? So that's one of the things that Ezra would have been aware of, right? That the people of the lands are always looking to absorb Israel. He would have also been aware of Numbers 24. Sorry, 25. After 24, this is after Balaam, he of the talking donkey, has blessed Israel so many times that his employer just tells him to go home because he wanted him to curse him. But he does give him some advice. You don't find this out until a few chapters later, but Balaam gives the Moabites and the Midianites some advice. And here's the outcome of that advice. While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods. The people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to the Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And it continues. Fast forward to the era of the kingdom itself, the apex of Israel. 1 Kings chapter 11. Solomon. King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. And you know what the consequence of that was. The division of the kingdom, the beginning of its fall. From the divided kingdom period, 1 Kings chapter 16. And this is verse 29, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, the son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. You know, if you're going to have somebody give a description of your marriage, this is not the description you want. But it always kind of cracks me up a little bit in a kind of a dark humor sort of way, because it says, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, right? All the evil that Jeroboam had done, as if that was nothing, he went and took Jezebel as his wife. It's like, this is the worst thing the man ever did. Not just because of her character, mind you. She was the one who told him to kill the guy for his vineyard. But because she then brought in her gods, Baal and Asherah. And Ahab built altars and places of worship for these gods. You see the pattern. Up against the example of a few who came in and wholeheartedly became part of Israel, the general trend of intermarriage was always to drift away from God. And so you get the feeling when you read Ezra's reaction that he is mulling these things over. And the worst of it is, remember, he's not just a scribe, he's a priest. He's a priest of the direct line of Aaron. And when he hears that the officials and the chief men are foremost, and later on we'll find out that even among the priests themselves, they are intermarrying with women of other nations. I mean, the rules for marriage for priests were really strict, even more so than for the general population of Israel to begin with. Let's give you a little snippet in Leviticus chapter 21. The rules of marriage for the average priest. Because they offer the Lord's food offerings, the bread of their God, therefore they shall be holy. They shall not marry a prostitute or a woman who's been defiled. Neither shall they marry a woman divorced from her husband. For the priest is holy to his God. I mean, if you can't even marry a woman who has been married before, right, even though divorce was legal in their culture, where do you suppose intermarriage with non-Israelites falls on this spectrum? I mean, if you were the chief priest, you weren't even allowed to marry a widow. You had to marry somebody who had never been married before, who had never known a man, right? So the purity standard here, this is not a cultural, this is a holiness issue. And Israel had compromised their holiness. And so Ezra's reaction is pretty reasonable given their situation. As he's sitting appalled, though, Verse 4 of Ezra 9, then all who trembled at the words of the God of Israel because of the faithlessness of the returned exiles gathered around me while I sat appalled until the evening sacrifice. And at the evening sacrifice, I rose from my fasting with my garment and my cloak torn and fell upon my knees and spread out my hands to the Lord my God. And he prays. So there is a group. You think about the distinction here. Part of the returnee community is obviously not particularly concerned with the word of the God of Israel. But there are some, those who tremble at the word, those who know that God takes seriously his covenant with them, and that if they do not, well, they've already seen what happens in that case. But Ezra's prayer is pretty traditional for one of these prayers of confession. You have an example of Daniel, right? When he finds out that the time is coming close that Jeremiah had predicted of 70 years, and he prays a prayer of confession that, we have gotten what less than we deserved, but just deserts, even so. Well, here, oh my God, I am ashamed and blush to lift my face to you, my God, for our iniquities have risen higher than our heads, and our guilt has mounted up to the heavens. From the days of our fathers to this day, we have been in great guilt. And for our iniquities, we, our kings and our priests, have been given into the hand of the kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, to plundering, and to utter shame as it is today. But now, for a brief moment, favor has been shown by the Lord our God to leave us a remnant and to give us a secure hold within his holy place, that our God may brighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our slavery, for we are slaves. Yet our God has not forsaken us in our slavery, but has extended to us his steadfast love before the kings of Persia, to grant us some reviving, to set up the house of our God, to repair its ruins, and to give us protection in Judea and Jerusalem. And now, O our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken your commandments, which you commanded by your servants, the prophets, saying, the land that you are entering to take possession of it is a land impure with the impurity of the peoples of the lands, with their abominations that have filled it from end to end with their uncleanness. Therefore do not give your daughters to their sons, neither take their daughters for your sons, and never seek their peace or prosperity, that you may be strong and eat the good of the land, and leave it for an inheritance to your children forever. And after all that has come upon us for our evil deeds and for our great guilt, seeing that you, our God, have punished us less than our iniquities deserved, and have given us such a remnant as this, shall we break your commandments again and intermarry with the peoples who practice these abominations? Would you not be angry with us until you consumed us, so that there should be no remnant, nor any to escape? O Lord, the God of Israel, you are just, for we are left a remnant that has escaped as it is today. Behold, we are before you in our guilt, for none can stand before you because of this. It is an impassioned prayer, and one with a very clear view of where they stand. For doing things like this, they had been cast out of the land. Now they have been allowed to come back, and they have started doing it again. And those who tremble at the word of the God of Israel understand that what has happened before can always happen again, unless God shows grace and unless the people turn toward him instead of away. And so while Ezra is praying and making confession, he's weeping and casting himself down before the house of God. You notice it says a very great assembly of men, women, and children gathered to him out of Israel, for the people wept bitterly. there's an awareness. And so the remnant, they rally around Ezra. Their very existence proved God's mercy. And now they call to their leader, and they do their own confession. We have broken faith with our God and have married foreign women from the peoples of the land. But even now, there is hope for Israel in spite of this. I think the smaller half, if you break this down, smaller half of that hope is the fact that there is a very great assembly of men, women, and children who weep over this sin, who tremble at the word of the God of Israel. The larger half of it is that God is a covenant-keeping God. And where there is repentance, there is forgiveness. And so they encourage him, arise, it is your task, right? And this task is, let us make a covenant with our God. So anew, a very localized, very specific covenant to put away all of these wives and their children. And this is where people get divided about this passage. Because, right, how can you break up a family like this? Well, like I said, marriage was a different thing in the ancient world than it is today. It is not so much just a union of two people, but of families, of clans, of tribes. And essentially what they are saying is, we are sending these women and whatever children they may have born back to their families. We are breaking off these alliances that we have drawn. When we get into Nehemiah, you'll find out that some of these alliances lead to some fairly shocking compromises among the highest of the leaders of the remnant. But at this point, the spokesman of this very great assembly says, we'll make a covenant with the Lord our God to put away all these alliances according to the counsel of my Lord Ezra and those who tremble at the commandment of our God. Let it be done according to the law. And he says to Ezra, arise, it's your task, and we are with you. Be strong and do it. So Ezra gets up, and he makes the leading priests and Levites and all Israel take an oath that they would do as had been said. And so they took the oath. So this is a full-on covenant that they have made before God to turn away from this particular sin.
Heather, when they're taught, they a number of times call this the exiles. My thought with the exiles is it's the ones coming back from exile in Babylon. But these are really those who are exiles, within their own country?
Essentially.
People they came back to, not the ones coming from Babylon.
Yeah, these are the ones who had come back, the first generation, who had built the temple and then suddenly apparently come to the conclusion that, well, what God said wasn't really going to happen, so they would take things into their own hands, really. And that's where all of these alliances start to spring up, because they are looking for security. They want, and so this new generation comes in and they find out what's been going on, and they're dismayed, to say the least. But they take very strong action. So after another night of mourning and fasting, Ezra comes and he sends out a proclamation to all of the returned exiles that they should assemble at Jerusalem, and that if anyone did not come within 3 days, by order of the officials and the elders, all his property should be forfeited and he himself banned from the congregation of the exiles. So they are calling people to make a choice. Either you decide in favor of the community, or you decide in favor of the surrounding, the nations, the people of the land. But if you do the latter, forget about having any inheritance in Israel, your property confiscated, your place among us. You'll be as a stranger, a Gentile. And so, within 3 days, it says, all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled at Jerusalem. They were motivated. So this is, they say, the 9th month, which on the Jewish calendar is actually December, somewhere around there. And the people sat in the open square before the house of God, trembling because of this matter and because of the heavy rain. December is the rainy season in that area, and they are so determined to do this that they are sitting in the pouring rain. So they're cold, they're pretty miserable, and they're a bit scared. And Ezra the priest stands up and announces, you have broken faith and married foreign women, and so increased the guilt of Israel. Now then, make confession to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives. And all the assembly answered with a loud voice, it is so, we must do as you have said. But they have a request. The people are many. It's a time of heavy rain. We can't stand in the open all this time. And they acknowledge the extent of it. It says, this is not a task for 1 or 2 days. We have greatly transgressed in this matter. So they come up with a plan. Let our officials stand for the whole assembly. Let all in our cities who have taken foreign wives come at appointed times. And with them the elders and judges of every city, until the fierce wrath of our God over this matter is turned away from us. And they even, as if this is meeting minutes, those in favor said aye, and these guys said nay. I'm not sure why. I wish I could know if they thought it was because it wasn't as big a deal, or if they thought it wasn't harsh enough. But, the dissenters are Jonathan, son of Asahel, Josiah, son of Tikva, and Meshullam, and Shabbathai, the Levite. So these 4 guys out of the entire assembly were the only dissenters. That's a pretty almost unanimous vote. And so this is what they did. Ezra selects men, heads of fathers' houses, and designates them each by name. And on the first day of the 10th month, they started examining the matter. So you can almost see, all right, so you guys, you're going to come on Tuesday. We're going to talk about your situation. We're going to examine, what's going on here. And then the next day, Wednesday, another batch comes in. Thursday, another batch comes in. Sabbath, they're off, right? So that sort of thing. It takes them 3 months to sort through all of this. It says they started on the first day of the 10th month, and by the first day of the first month, so that's 10, 11, 12, right? They came to the end of it. And they come up with a list, about 100 names, which, a lot of people are like, well, it's only 100 people. This wasn't as big a deal as we thought it was. But really, if you think about it, how many of these situations actually turned out to be a Rahab or a Ruth situation, where they had left their people to cling to the God of Israel? Whatever the situation, you have this roll call of the guilty. Not going to go through it. It's one of those passages where you just kind of skim over and you're like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. But if you notice, it's very Ezra-like, divided up. First, sons of the priests. These are the priests who had married foreign women. And then there are Levites. Not as strictly regulated as the priests, but still no good. And then, of course, the lay people of Israel. You've got this big paragraph. And if this were the actual end of the story, this would be a really depressing ending. But in the original documents, Ezra and Nehemiah are one scroll. So we are going to move ahead, and that's not that things get a lot brighter. There's more conflict in store. But a new character enters the stage, Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah, cupbearer to the king, who gets some bad news. And he decides to do something about it. But that's for next week. We'll look at Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2 next week. All right. So we can stop recording. We have 10 minutes. What do you think?